Hey, Nick, cheers to you today.
And to you as well.
I'm calling this episode "The World is on Fire." I woke up and I was like, "Oh, Lindsey Graham died." That was just somewhat of a surprise.
Yeah, it's anyone's passing is unfortunate. Yeah, and it's going to be the political ramifications are of course huge, but we will let those be dealt with. Let the family mourn, and then let the political system move on.
And Nick, such a great point is no matter what your political opinions of these people, they're humans. They have kids. They have people who care and love about them and family. And so we've always got to respect that part of it and make sure that we have that human emotion. Because if we're not respecting the humanity under it, it's why all these other atrocities happen. It's, whether we're looking at what's happened in Cuba or Iran or anywhere, these are families being devastated.
You're absolutely right, Amy. And that speaking of, so that really brings home what's going on in Cuba right now, because of the energy embargo that the United States has placed on them, there are a lot of people dying there. The hospitals are barely functioning. I read that the Mexicans were going to start importing oil again, flaunting the embargo. I have not heard of any, if that's actually taken place yet. And I've heard that China is going to start trying to import more of solar panels to try to get up energy in alternative means. Not sure what the status of that is yet. So they're looking for ways to work around the current administration's embargo, but it's a tragedy for the Cuban people, because while the Communist Party, the party leaders are certainly taking care of themselves, the regular everyday Cubans are facing a very miserable situation.
Nick, I really want to highlight something that you mentioned there about communism. I'm seeing so much on the internet lately about communism, socialism, what's going on in New York City, etc. Can you just take a minute to describe the difference of these different social systems? Because what's happening in New York City is not actually communism.
Yeah, and I want to be fair too. What Russia and China and Cuba have instituted, and North Korea, isn't communism in the sense that Marx and Engels envisioned it. Maybe that's what Lenin really wanted to do in Russia, but that's not what ended up happening. It ended up in every one of these places becoming effectively a single party dictatorship. And they then they do take control of the industry, of all of the means of production, but they certainly aren't working toward the welfare of the common citizen of their countries. They're working for enriching their personal cliques. So it's really out of control in places like Cuba, North Korea, China, where the party officials live very, very well and have a whole lot of power, and then the average citizens don't. So that when we conflate communism, we look at it as through the lens of how communism, the communist idea, has been used as a vehicle for single party dictatorship, to basically authoritarian power throughout the world. The idea of communism was never like that. And in theory, I stress in theory because it's never been put into practice the way Marx and Engels envisioned it. But in theory, it is not incompatible with personal liberties, civil liberties, the freedoms that we know and love. So when we talk about it here in the United States, we talk about the socialist systems that people like Bernie Sanders and Mondani are advocating for. It's not that single party dictatorship that has control of everything of the economy. It's rather they're looking for ways to extend social services to more people.
Which is much more like the Swedish or Norwegian, Danish
and
models.
I was going to say the British universal health care. That's Bernie Sanders' big thing is Medicare for all. He wants to see some sort of because we tie medical insurance to employment here in the United States, which is all well and good if you're employed and you're healthy enough to get employed. But if you need to get healthy to get employed, then you're kind of it's a catch-22. You're SOL. So that's the injustice that they're looking to rectify. They're not looking to take over SpaceX and turn it into a government company. But on the other hand, Trump has actually taken a direct government investment in over a dozen companies across the United States, from mineral extraction to chip production. So if there's anyone that's leaning toward communist, it's actually the Trump administration. but they choose to define it
Excellent.
differently.
And people don't seem to understand the different social and economic models and political models and kind of converge it all into one. And so I write a lot about this for those that follow me. Definitely going to make sure that we're putting out more so that people can really understand these differences. And just want to highlight here when it comes to Cuba, the humanitarian aid, the need for people to have basic electricity, running water that's not contaminated, things like this. Like, these are things that we should want for every human being on Earth, and every life matters. Let's go on because we have a lot to cover.
We do, yeah. And I could go on for Cuba for a little while here, but I do want to touch on Venezuela. I think when last we spoke, it's been a couple weeks now, but it was right after the earthquake. And one of the things I threw out there is it's going to be really interesting to see how the government responds there in Venezuela, if they're going to have the capacity to really start with a rebuilding effort and recovery effort. And there is a whole lot of unrest and criticism in Venezuela about the perception that the government has not been adequate in responding to this crisis. Part of it is certainly the fact that after 20, 30 years of Chavez and Maduro, the government is just it's not capable of doing a lot. But then there are people in crisis, so the government needs to figure it out. And from what I understand, they have not done a great job. That's not to say that there haven't been great efforts to try to help some people, but there have also been reports of police looting some of the buildings that have been knocked down. So the Venezuela situation is not looking great at the moment. Hopefully, we will be able to get some positive news going out of there, and the people of Caracas will be able to recover and move on with their lives.
Yeah, and definitely a testament to humans surviving in those situations. And I just want to put a plug in here about climate data. Is we can't delete all the climate data we want and not monitor it. The climate's going to happen. The world is going to happen. It's going to be hot. There's going to be tsunamis. There are going to be earthquakes. There was actually an earthquake here in Lake Michigan, which is unprecedented. I don't want to say unprecedented. Wow. It has been unprecedented. It's been about 100 years since an incident like this has happened. So if we're not tracking and monitoring this data, it doesn't stop it from happening. So
and there was a tornado in Alaska not that long ago too. So that kind of blew my mind.
Exactly. We definitely need to be watching. So let's head over. I think we want to head over to Europe now, or
I wanted to talk about Africa, if I may. So let's start in Mali. There have been additional attacks. So there's a kind of a combination of two different rebel groups in Mali have kind of teamed up to go against the government. There's a group of Tuareg rebels that really camp out in the north part of the desert part of the country in the Sahara. They are looking for full independence. If not full independence, then some sort of autonomy underneath the Malayan government. And they have, to some extent, teamed up with an Islamist group. And this combination has been extremely successful at attacking the government forces all the way down in Bamako. The Malayan, and they're being run by a military junta right now. They have contracted for some Russian mercenaries to have helped them out. The Russians are not being particularly effective right now, and that's putting a whole lot of pressure on the Malayan government. So I think the Islamists, what they're trying to recreate is the success that they saw in Syria of overthrowing the government and then establishing their own quasi more moderate government that they can take power in. And of course, like I said, the Tuaregs just want some level of independence in the north. So it's one of those conflicts that doesn't get a lot of press in the West, but it has the potential to spill out into the borders, Mauritania, Niger, going up into Algeria and Morocco, that can push more refugees, displaced persons up toward Europe and create a lot more pressure in Europe, which is something we have to keep on.
I want to highlight the straight lines through here in the geography. So for anybody who's looking at the map, you can really see, from Algeria and Mali, Mauritania, Western Sahara, Niger, etc. All these places where these are straight lines, this is all European mass that was created from the colonization. So, when you do see these things, when you look at down here in Bamako compared to up here in Timbuktu, you're really looking at this was not a natural line. Whereas when you're following rivers and things, you are talking about much more natural geography and geographic boundaries. Anything you want to add on that?
Well, and it's very porous. So yes, there's a line on a map, but it's the desert. there's no demarcation. There's no way to say, okay, right here I'm in Mali, and right here I'm in Mauritania. There's no line. There's nobody guarding there. There's no checkpoint. So it's really, really easy to move. Well, let me caveat that it's easy to move physically from one spot to another. The Sahara is an incredible barrier to human movement, though. It is in many, many ways more of a physical barrier than the Mediterranean Sea or a mountain range. As technology has improved and we're able to move more further, faster, and carry more water, is lessened to some extent. But that is still a pretty significant physical barrier to try to move people through. But still, when you're trying to patrol that and control that, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, and so definitely hot spots to look out at. And people don't appreciate Africa enough, and the fact of so many of these conflicts that you see around the world, they bubble up and bubble through Africa. And so one of the things, and this has nothing to do with anything we plan on talking about, but this is why we drink during the show, right? So I was in Nigeria during the elections for Barack Obama. It was a primaries, and when he was against Hillary Clinton. And one of the things that was said to me that just always resonated as a local there in Nigeria said, how can you support this Kenyan boy? And I don't think anyone in America would ever think of Barack Obama as a Kenyan. I'm not talking birthright issues or anything. I'm talking legitimacy of the fact that his heritage is from Kenya and that this is well established. Yeah. In Africa, we did not discuss how would this impact our African relationships whatsoever. And I feel like if we were going to elect somebody who was like half British or half French or something, and their literal biological parent came from that country, we would have had those discussions.
Yeah.
And I feel like when it comes to Africa, it is so just thrown under the rug that we never had these deeper discussions about how would a president who came from whose parentage came from an African country impact us, and then how would this impact our relations with African countries? And so I think we missed out on a huge opportunity as a country to really explore these kind of relations, and it was just completely glossed over.
And something that our society does too much is we look at Africa as a single thing, and Latin America as well as a single thing, when it's a very, very diverse and dynamic group of a lot of different peoples, a lot of different cultures. You can look down at South Africa in just the last few weeks. There have been mass protests about the same sort of immigration issues that we're dealing with in the United States and that Europe's dealing with. There's a lot of immigrants going to South Africa looking for work. There are other Africans, but the South Africans are reacting very violently to these other Africans that are coming through. Just because they're African doesn't mean that they're all one group, that they all believe the same thing or have the same aspirations. And the same thing in Latin America. A lot of the Latin American countries, there's a great deal of animosity between them. So just because like Peru and Ecuador is next to each other, don't assume that they get along. And if saying like somebody's from Guatemala versus El Salvador, you could alienate them by making that mistake, because these are very different cultures, very different places, and they have different reactions to somebody with a Kenyan heritage becoming president of the United States, or us teaming up with Cuban refugees as our Secretary of State. So
absolutely wonderful, wonderful things to point out. It is a global world. Where do you want to go to next on the map?
Well, I want to really quick touch on Libya. Since we took out Gaddafi, officially there are two. Libya has been basically bisected into north to south. So on the east side, you have a warlord that is running the eastern side of Libya out of Benghazi, and on the western side is the UN acknowledged government based out of Tripoli. There are different factions that are controlling these different things. Like Turkey, for example, I think is supporting the east, and the UAE is supporting the west. I think I might have that backwards. But there are different countries that are trying to use this as a proxy battle to gain power and political prestige more globally. But on the good news side, there have been some low-level reconciliation talks between the two sides. So they're not about to merge into a single government overnight. But they are trying to take things down a notch. They're trying to not be so confrontational and violent with one another. So it's a positive step to say, hey, let's not resort to fighting that we're seeing in Mali or Sudan. That is another whole saga that we're running out of time to talk about. But that's just one good news story I want to highlight before we leave today.
Okay. What's your good news story? Where are we going next?
Well, so and then probably got to talk about Iran. The ceasefire has fallen apart. The president was very clear on that. And this is one of the big important things that you actually have to rely on diplomats that know what they're doing to negotiate these things. The administration said that the wording in the memorandum of understanding was intentionally vague, but that vagueness causes problems because the Iranians interpret it one way, we interpret it another, and now we're again fighting basically over the Strait of Hormuz. So we're not even fighting over what we originally started this war for. We're fighting over a consequence of it. We have asked them to commit to not striking ships going through Hormuz. Of course, they're not going to do that because that's their leverage. They would say, well, then you commit to not ever attacking us and we'll get along. But we're not going to commit to that either. So we're back to the point that if you actually have diplomats negotiating these things that go through the technical fine points to hammer out a deal, that's when you get to something that lasts beyond 3 weeks is maybe what we got out of it. And we're back to fighting each other again.
And I do want to highlight that Congress did go ahead and address this through war powers and has said this should not be going on. So we really have a constitutional issue within the United States as well, because those did actually get passed. So the fact that there are actions going on actually goes against,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Huge issues here at home, huge issues around the world. Nick, we have went over. I feel like we can just drink and talk all day today. This is why I call this episode "World on Fire" because there's just so much going on. And if you're not familiar with some of these actions going on in Africa, I'm definitely going to be writing a few more articles on it and highlighting these because just so important that we recognize when these little things, happen. When a little archduke gets shot, then suddenly you're in a war, right? Like we have to understand the second and third order of effects of some of these places, and we often forget that. Nick, anything you want to add?
Oh, geez, there's so much. I wanted to talk about Sudan, but we didn't get to that today, and we still haven't talked about the war between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So it's so much more that we'll have to get to next week.
No, world on fire. So there we go. Everyone, if you can't do much about it, write your Congress people. If you're part of the global community, get a hold of your own elected officials, whatever way that you can. And back to that kind of piece of Cuba and Venezuela. If there is something that you can do to help your neighbor, help another person. I mean, maybe you could grow some vegetables and can share those vegetables with your neighbor, bring some extra blankets, whatever. Let's take care of each other as a global community because in the end, we're all people with the basic same hopes and dreams of getting out of the bed in the morning and having some clean water to drink.
Yeah.
Okay, that was kind of a deep note on that. Cheers to you, and thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Ma'am.